It's not true. That's unfortunately the case. Maybe the Debates Commission, having no commissioner, lacked the capacity to understand their own rules. We had nominated 342 candidates. They reviewed the Green Party's status against the criteria set by the commission and ruled that we would be in the debates. Even the day before, they confirmed we'd be in the debates. The difficulty that occurred, there was no decision by Green Party at any level to remove candidates for any reason. All of our candidates were trying to get their paperwork in. We all had, well, differing degrees of difficulty, but the rules established by the Debates Commission were not how many candidates you had on the ballot, but how many you had nominated. Many of our nominated candidates, given the nature of the snap election, a lot of new returning officers who were confused about the rules, and a new public climate where people were unwilling to say to a stranger, here's my name, my address, and my signature to get our candidates on the ballot. We have never encountered that before. We even had some of our volunteers harassed and threatened to such an extent that they didn't want to go out and collect signatures again. But just to be clear, the rules were for nominated candidates, and we met that entirely. We had a full slate of nominated candidates. It was very, very hard for us as a team to see so many of our nominated candidates have trouble filing paperwork, getting signatures, and so on. We think there needs to be changes in the Elections Act to deal with this. I've raised it already with the Privy Council Office and CSIS and their election monitoring. I raised it with them weeks before we were thrown out of the debates, and we shared it with the Debates Commission that our nominated candidates, some of our volunteers were, as I mentioned, threatened and harassed. My own husband, is a candidate, only got in his signatures with 1 minute to spare, and a bunch of them were ruled out by the returning officer. There was so much confusion on the ground. So, my response to the Debates Commission is that they behaved in an anti democratic fashion. They have interfered with the ability in a fundamental way. They've undermined a national party running candidates in every province, the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, and at the same time that we have over 240 nominated candidates who are also on the ballot. That's where they made up a new rule on the ballot. The Bloc Québécois was in the debates, only running in one province and with 78 candidates. And just to underscore, we only have had televised leaders debates in Canada since the 1960s when we started having televised leaders debates around the world. This is the first time in all those elections that a political party with elected members of parliament, has been kept out of debates. The only time. So it was discriminatory, anti democratic, and they gave us no time to respond. They told the media the night before, Tuesday night, that we weren't going to be in the debates. They informed us on Wednesday morning. They deprived us of the ability to even get into a court and ask for review, and they never met with us to give us a chance to rebut their erroneous conclusions that were wrong, factually wrong. So our response is that this is an outrage. Well, especially, I mean, I'm a sitting member of parliament, and so is Mike Morris in Kitchener Centre. By the way, I was very honored to receive the endorsement from Muslim Vote, an effort to increase voter turnout around issues that matter to the Muslim community and the Islamic community. But I'm in a co-leadership situation. We've, as Greens, moved in the direction of a group called political party Quebec Solidaire in Canada, but also global Greens around the world often have co-leaders to demonstrate that it's not one person top down who should run anything. And we have a very democratic party that believes in grassroots democracy. So I was particularly, as someone who's done a lot of the leaders' debates, and by the way, faced discrimination just like this over and over again since I first got in the debates in 2008. Then they kept me out in 2011, kept me out in 2015. I got to do some of the debates in 2019. It's been constant. And then they created the Debates Commission to create fair rules, and the Debates Commission did the most unfair thing ever. But I was really looking forward to seeing my 35-year-old co-leader, who is a young man of color, who's had lots of experience in conflict zones, who is a human rights activist, Jonathan Pedno, in the debates, being a Quebecer and from Montreal. Frankly, it was our one chance to have Quebecers recognize that we're a federal political party that also stands strongly for Quebec. Excluding Jonathan from the debates, especially the first complaint came from the Bloc Québécois. They didn't want to be having another Quebecer on the stage who supports a united Canada. In any case, the ways in which it's hurt us, we won't be able to know until after the election how much damage was done. But the damage is large and it's very anti democratic. We're the strongest pro Palestinian party in parliament. And I think that there's another undercurrent to why they don't want our voices being heard in an election campaign. Well, the Debates Commission, I think, is very much, its credibility is very much at risk. The Debates Commission was created after Justin Trudeau won the majority government in 2015 because in 2015 the NDP party, rather the New Democrats, colluded with the Conservatives under Stephen Harper, with both the Conservative and the NDP leaders saying they wouldn't show up for the debates, so they managed to get it canceled. So they created the Debates Commission to make things fairer, and they appointed a commissioner who was eminent and respected. So the commissioner from 2015 until 2023 was our former Governor General David Johnston. And he met with Greens early on. We talked about what kind of rules would be fair. What I hadn't realized until this whole mess happened last week, and we were deprived our spot in the debates, having had it confirmed to us even the day before that we met all the rules, was that David Johnston had stepped down as debates commissioner in March 2023, 2 years ago, and the position has been vacant ever since. So when we talk about the debates commission, I think it's really important to say we're talking the decisions, as far as we can see, were made by senior staff, by a journalist, Michelle Cormier, who served as executive director. There is no commissioner. So I don't feel comfortable criticizing the Leaders Debate Commission because we will need fair debates in the next election. And because of a number of errors by Mr. Cormier, including registering right-wing lobby groups as if they were media into the room and then canceling the post-debate interviews with leaders. The number of mistakes uh, that speak to incompetence and a lack of awareness about the political realities of how much damage it does to democracy to tell a party that has two sitting members of parliament and is running candidates in every province across Canada and the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, that you are now silenced and thrown out. The confusion, we've even had people calling our offices and saying, if I vote for the Green candidate on my ballot, will my vote be counted or are you still a party? So the amount of confusion and disinformation created by the Commission's faulty reasoning and depriving journalists of asking questions of the other leaders, just compounding them, throwing us out, really endangers the credibility and future of the Debates Commission itself. And I'd like to protect the Debates Commission and the work that it should have been doing, but make sure the government finds a commissioner. So you can't have an organization that runs on the strength of the reputation of the commissioner and have the position vacant for 2 years and then think they'll know how to run a debate because they clearly botched this. They broke their own rules and then they said things that were false about the Green Party. We are pursuing potentially suing them when the election is over. I used to practice law. I'm not a lawyer who likes going to court for no reason, but they did a substantial damage in the course of breaking their own rules. But it wasn't the Debates Commission itself. It was a couple members of their senior staff in the absence of an appointed commissioner? I certainly hope not. There are other examples of where we're seeing crackdowns on free speech that flow over the border from the United States. I think this was a case of incompetence without strong political motivation, although one wonders how someone whose background was as a journalist could have failed to know what other journalists knew, that these two outfits, True North and Rebel News, had registered themselves as advocates in the election as third party groups promoting a position. The head of Rebel News was apparently riding around in a vehicle with propaganda on the sides of the vehicle. This is Ezra Levant from Rebel News, was riding around outside the Radio Canada building with slogans and attacks on Mark Carney that suggested that he was part of these conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum and so on. I didn't witness them. I've only read news reports of it. But how could someone who was a journalist before becoming executive director to the commission not investigate before giving speaking opportunities? The French debates, they had the Rebel News and True North allowed to ask questions. And they had more reporters allowed in the room than Radio Canada or CBC. So this is outrageous. And then the second night of the English debates, these right wing groups were emboldened and actually pretending to be reporters, actually were threatening real reporters. So it's it will take an analysis after the votes are cast, but we've been deprived of a fundamental right as a party with elected members of parliament running in every province across this country. That, I mean, I don't, Monsieur Blanchet has a right to be in the debates, of course, but they only run candidates in Quebec. So they only run 78 candidates, and we ran 200, I think it was 240 some, I lost track, in 10 provinces and two territories. And they're in the debates in English and French, and we're excluded from both. I think voters have a right to be angry. Not only was the Green Party damaged by this, democracy is damaged by this when there's nobody, as the woman you were commenting on who sent in a comment, nobody was really talking about climate change on that stage. They all wanted to build pipelines faster. Nobody was talking about what do we do to ensure full and free and fair elections in Canada and to avoid the disinformation that sneaks into social media. So I'm working very hard to defend Canada against the right wing fascist policies of Donald Trump. At the same time, we need to protect Canada from, I can't ascribe motives to what the executive director of the commission did, but he badly, badly mishandled things, deprived a major national political party in the Green Party of our rights, and has changed the course of the election in ways that are profoundly anti democratic. It's heartbreaking, really. Oh no, we're not a one issue party. I mean, we obviously are the strongest party on climate, but we have a full plan to deal with Donald Trump and the tariff threats. We don't think it's enough, by the way, to just counter the tariffs from the Trump administration with retaliatory tariffs of our own. We support what the government's doing with retaliatory tariffs, but it'd be far better to protect our own industries from the US through economic sovereignty. For instance, right now, most of the companies in the oil patch that are getting bitumen out of the oil sands are owned in the United States. So, of course, they don't care if we ship out bitumen to be processed at refineries in the United States any more than the US based logging companies. They ship out raw logs to be processed in the United States. Greens are calling for strategic reserves of natural resources, where we, as a country, buy our own logs and bitumen and aluminum and potash, strategic reserves of natural resources for the benefit of Canada, not forcing producers to have to sell to the United States and be hit with tariffs, holding them back doing the work in manufacturing, processing, upgrading, and so on in Canada to create jobs in Canada. We also want to end what's going on where we have public Canadian dollars being invested in the United States. Our own Canada pension plan, those investments are run under a law called the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board Act that requires that the investment board take our pension dollars and put them in wherever they're going to make the most profit, return on investment. So there's no requirement under the Canada Pension Plan that our pension dollars are invested in Canada. That should be a minimum. Why are we putting our pension dollars into the US economy to aid them when they're retaliating against us like this? They're not even retaliating. We haven't done anything to them. We're the ones abiding by the trade agreements. We're the ones abiding by international law. We're getting threats from a dictator in the United States who never wants to see another election in the United States. Donald Trump is no friend of democracy, and he he wants to absorb Canada into the United States. Well, no way. I was the first federal party leader to make it very clear that we will never be the 51st state. I posted a message to Donald Trump, which got seen by over 40 million Americans. We won't be the 51st state, but maybe California should be the 11th province, or maybe Washington state, or Oregon, or Maine, or New Hampshire, or Vermont. We as a party have been clearer and made a better job of pushing back on Trump than the other parties. And I think our record is strong. And had we been in the debates, more Canadians would know that. But we have a very strong plan to protect Canada's economy while also enhancing and modernizing our economy so that we don't just work for US corporations and foreign corporations cutting down our trees and sending them to mills in other countries. Well, the difficulty is when we were kept out of the debates, we were also kept out of media coverage. So if any viewers here of Muslim TV go look at, say, the CBC website or CTV, and it compares the parties' platforms. We were the first party we had our platform out before the debates. We wanted to make sure that when Jonathan Pedneau, our co-leader, was on the stage with the other leaders, he could say, our platform is out, you can read it. Here we are today talking on April 21st with a vote on April 28th, and the Conservative Party has still not put out its platform. We put out the Parliamentary Budget Office. We actually had our economics verified by the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is impartial, nonpartisan, and has an official role assisting Parliament. They started publishing our numbers April 8th or 9th because it takes a long time for them to do the analysis and post them. None of the major national media has mentioned that. None of the major national media has mentioned that we come closer to ending deficits than any of the other parties. We'll be interested to see what Mr. Poilievre says, and we do it without cuts. We do it reducing taxes on the lowest earning Canadians and shifting taxation to wealth, people with over $50 million in assets, not people who own a home that's worth more than a million. We do it by shifting to corporate taxes, wealth taxes, and one fantastic plank that we have is that if you charge 35 cents for every $100 in bond trading, like on the stock market, I'm going to repeat that, a 35-cent tax on every $100 transaction yields us enough money to over $90 billion by 2030 so that we can actually cut taxes for lower income earners and fund our healthcare plans to get everybody a family doctor. We're very responsible as a party, and we have a very good plan to push back on Trump, protect our economy, and not just protect it, but modernize it and make us more self reliant and self sufficient as a country, which is going to be entirely to the good of Canada's economy long term. Not only not to be dependent on the United States, but to diversify trade and not be dependent ever again on one major economy, especially when that one major economy can be taken over by a bully. It's not really increased. It's always been between me and the Conservative in Saanich Gulf Islands. This this area had a Conservative member of Parliament, with the exception of one term, for more than 20 years before I won. And when I won in 2011, I defeated a sitting cabinet member in Stephen Harper's cabinet. And ever since then, so in 2011, I defeated a Conservative. Well, the Conservative Party had been here for 20 years as the dominant party. So, of course, they have deep roots and volunteers, and they expect to win it back every time. This time, again, it's a tough race. Unlike previous election campaigns, previous Conservative candidates used to show up at debates. Ms. Olmsted came to one and not since. I, the Conservatives here are gaining strength, ironically, because a number of people think they want to vote Liberal to help Mark Carney. And I hate the way our voting system works. And if Justin Trudeau hadn't broken his promise that 2015 would be the last election under first past the post, we wouldn't have this awful voting system. But what it means is that anytime someone decides, oh, I always vote for Elizabeth because she works so hard and whatever, I mean, my work is appreciated and people know I'm very honest and very hardworking. But they think, well, this time around, I really have to make sure Poilievre doesn't get in, so I better vote Liberal. Every time they do that, they're just assisting the Conservative candidate because we're running neck and neck. And when I say that, the other party's candidates say, oh, that's not true. I asked them, the election is in a few days. If you have any polls that say anything different, let me see them. Because so far, all the published polls say what you've said. It's a close race between me and the Conservative. So Saanich Gulf Islands residents will either have me as their member of parliament when the election ends, or they'll have a Conservative. So it's sad to see so many people who mean to do well and think they're going to hurt the Conservative chances overall nationally, making the mistake of voting the wrong way for a Liberal, which only, because of the weird way our voting system works, helps a Conservative beat me. So I will not be beaten. I will fight. I am the hardest working MP Saanich Gulf Islands has ever had, and I've delivered lots of strong results for my community, and I want to keep on doing it. I'd hate for them to have a useless MP in future. So I really hope that anyone who's still considering which way they're going to vote, and by the way, it's the same story in Nanaimo Ladysmith. It's either going to be the Green candidate, Paul Manley, or a Conservative candidate. So we have to encourage people not to vote out of fear, being afraid of Pierre Poilievre. He's already in our rearview mirror. It's going to be a Mark Carney Liberal government. People need more Green voices in Parliament to fight for human rights, to fight to end the genocide, to fight hard for what matters for the world, for peace and stability, and not to be confused. Vote for what you want. And in Nanaimo Ladysmith, Paul Manley is the best and strongest MP Nanaimo Ladysmith has ever had. And in Saanich Gulf Islands, it's hard for me to say this about myself. It's easier for me to boast about other people. But I know I'm the hardest working MP and have had a better, stronger record of delivering for my many communities within Saanich Gulf Islands than any previous MP. And I want to keep doing that work. I have to say, I haven't mentioned yet that the Green Party in Canada is part of a family of Green parties that are global. And I'm very proud of my global Green colleagues who, for instance, are in the European Parliament and in countries throughout Europe. There are over, by the way, 400 elected members of Parliament around the world who are Greens. And in the face of right wing populism and attacking immigration in Europe, it's been the Greens who have stood up to say, we protect refugees, we stand up for human rights, and we accept that immigration is important. As Greens, we support immigration to Canada, but not without planning. And this is where Justin Trudeau's Liberals went so far wrong. Even a lot of new Canadians were saying, what's happening here? Well, the Liberals in the last government got an outside US based management consulting firm called McKinsey and Company and asked them what should Canada's immigration targets be. They went up quite dramatically to 500,000 people a year, without thinking about, but where will they live? What jobs can they get? Will they be supported in their new country? Will this work? And then they also, because of not funding post-secondary education enough in Canada, by the way, we would get rid of tuition so that it's mostly young people, but basically Canadians of any age who want to continue their education. We make K through 12 free, and then suddenly it gets very expensive to continue in post-secondary. By creating a situation where so many smaller colleges had to rely on international students, we had recruiters lying to international students, bringing them to Canada, and again, with no plan to actually help them find jobs. We need those skilled workers. We have big gaps in employees for businesses, trained people, doctors, nurses, airline pilots, lab technicians. But if you have what happened where under the Liberals, they allowed a huge increase in the target to 500,000 people a year. And there was no debate in Parliament about this, by the way. There was no vote in Parliament. Suddenly, our target is a 500,000 people a year. And the net effect of that has been to make it harder for parties like us, although we'll always speak the truth to power. We need immigration to Canada. The baby boomer demographic is not doing the work anymore, retiring. I'm in the last group of baby boomers. I'm not retiring. But the reality of it is we need immigration or we cannot sustain an economy to take care of those of us who are retiring, who are seniors. This is critical. And so Green Party stands for immigration, but with proper planning, ensuring that we look at cooperative agreements with the provinces. Lots of parts of Canada have suffered from depopulation, where a one mill town and the mill dies, and then everybody's out of work and the houses go empty. There are lots of places across Canada with empty homes, empty schools, and underutilized infrastructure. Obviously, not in Vancouver, not in Montreal, not in Toronto, but elsewhere. So we need to keep up levels of immigration after a proper debate and planning to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on housing prices, access to health care, proper education. These are all things Canada needs, and we need immigrants to do the work. We need new Canadians, and we need to welcome new Canadians with full support that's culturally sensitive, that ensures language training and being able to work and live in a community with the language of your birth when you've moved to Canada. There's a lot we can do together, and Greens favor immigration, but not the way the Liberals were doing it. Well, on the floor of Parliament, I was the first member of Parliament right after the October 7th attacks to call for a ceasefire, a negotiated ceasefire. A number of years ago, we called for an arms embargo on Israel, not just because of the recent conflicts, but because the government of Israel is armed to the teeth. I was one of the co-founders of the Canada Palestinian Parliamentary Friendship Group, and we brought a delegation of 18 members of parliament from all the parties on a tour of occupied territories, on a tour of Palestine, working with the Palestinian Authority back in March of 2018. And I was pretty aware of the horrors of the settlements program and pretty aware of the daily denial of basic human rights to the people living within the occupied territories, whether Gaza, we weren't allowed to go to Gaza, by the way, we tried, but we were in Ramallah, we were in Hebron, we were in Bethlehem, we were in, of course, in Jerusalem. We visited the occupied territories and we met with groups like Bat Salem and Breaking the Silence and heard from the lips of former Israeli soldiers what their daily instructions were. We, as a group, filed a report with the government condemning the way the Israeli military arrests children. Now, that was all back in 2018. So, fast forward to October 7th. We very strongly condemned what Hamas did. It was an extremely, well, it was a violation uh, of every possible imaginable treaty to protect innocent lives. But we also recognize that Hamas is an organization, and you can't call it a war when it's between an illegal organization and a country like Israel. I always differentiate as a human being. My stepkids are Jewish. The Jewish community in Canada has been feeling an increased level of anti-Semitism, just as the Islamic community in Canada has been feeling an increased level of Islamophobia. We can't have either. They're hatreds that don't belong in Canada. But when I look at the situation, while I defend the right of the state of Israel to exist, I've called out on the floor of the House of Commons that the enemy of peace is Benjamin Netanyahu. And in that, my colleague, who's the leader of the Green Party of Israel, she had a piece published years ago in the newspaper Haaretz that the right wing extremists within Netanyahu's government have in common with Hamas a desire to never see peace. So, Palestinian Authority, we work with them pretty much daily. The Green Party of Canada urges Canada to immediately recognize the existence of a state of Palestine, to immediately stop allowing Netanyahu's government to, I mean, they just recently, the murder of medics who clearly had ambulance lights following all international law to reach people who needed help after an Israeli attack. For those medics to have been murdered and the Israeli army to say, oh, they made all the mistakes, they didn't have their vehicles properly labeled. I wonder if it hadn't been for one of the poor medics who sacrificed his life, who died there, but he'd been running his video camera and his video was found on his body after his death. Still, that medic was a silent witness to what really happened. His phone showed that the Israeli army was lying. And they can say, oh, there were some miscommunications, we didn't follow all the protocols. This is an ongoing, well, Pope Francis, who just passed away this morning, called it what it is. It's a cruelty. It's not a war. It's an attack on innocent people. It's not a war. It's a war crime that goes on, and every single day, innocent people are killed. It's beyond what a people can bear without their heart breaking so badly. And Canada has a role to stand up for human rights and stand up for peace and call out Netanyahu for what he is. He and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they're all friends. They're a particular kind of politician who wants to ignore international law and pursue for their own political careers, for their own egos. Netanyahu didn't even try to rescue Israeli hostages in the aftermath of October 7th. He was too busy trying to use October 7th to keep himself out of jail for his crimes committed in Israel. So, oh, I know I gave too long an answer. Where we stand is we stand with the people of Palestine, and we stand with the innocent people who live in Israel who also want peace. Thank you so much for having me. And if you are watching, please share, like, and subscribe to Muslim TV.